Welcome to the second video in getting you oriented to Math 141. And in this one, we're going to focus on how grading works in the class and how assessments are going to work. I guess what I'll just say from the outset is that my grading system is pretty non-traditional. And the reason for that is what I mentioned in the first video, which is that I really believe in a growth mindset. And so I try to do things a little bit differently so that, first of all, grading your assessments is much more meaningful. And then second of all, so that, if you are at a score that you're not happy with, that you're not stuck there. So I'm going to describe that whole process and how that's going to work. Just know ahead of time, it is different. And so you very well may have some questions over it. So if after watching this video, there's some things you're unclear on, please do reach out to me right away and let me know. All right, so I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. And the place we're going to start is in the important documents module. Let's click on rubrics. So the first thing that's different about the way that I go about grading is that I do not grade with points. So, I think of the traditional way of grading in a math class usually is to make it a little larger, is to, take some sort of test or quiz. And, maybe the first problem is worth 7 points and the second problem is worth 10 points. And on each problem, you're given a certain number of the points. Maybe you earn all 7 on the first question, but then you only earn 6 out of 10 on the second question. And that's kind of what we're used to. The thing about it though is, what does 6 out of 10 mean exactly, right? If I get 4 out of 7, what does it mean? Does it mean that I understood a lot of it, but just made a minor error? Does it mean that I really didn't understand it at all? Just when you look at points, it's hard to tell exactly what to make of it. So instead of grading questions with just an arbitrary number of points assigned, what I do instead is I grade based on a rubric. Now, you might be used to this in, like, say, an English class, where there's a description of how you kind of achieve different levels on, say, a paper you write. So I do the same thing with every standard or with every topic in this class. I write a rubric that describes what it means to be one of these 5 levels of mastery. So you could be an expert, you could be proficient, developing, novice, or not yet. Now, these numbers here that are next to them are often the way you're going to see them, those levels of mastery referred to, say, in the grade book, or when I send an assessment back to you after grading it. But that's just a shorthand. They're not meant for you to do math with or to average or anything like that. They're just a shorthand to stand for expert. So if you see a 4, it means expert. If you see a 3, it means proficient. Every single different standard, every topic has its own description, so that what you can do is when you start on a topic, you can read what it means to be an expert or what it means to be developing, and know that ahead of time as you're working on the skills and on the homework. So I'm, of course, not going to read through all of these right now. But what I will do is I'll read the general rubric that kind of all the other ones are based off of, right? In other words, in all of these descriptions, I make them specific to the standard I'm talking about, but I try to follow this general principle. Okay. So in general, an expert means there's an ability to accurately address the most complex and advanced problems within an objective that's been demonstrated. So in other words, doesn't matter how complicated of a problem I throw at you, you're able to do it. Proficient says the ability to apply concepts appropriately and with accuracy to address standard problems has been demonstrated. On the most complex problems, there is a flaw in either the synthesizing of the many strategies required or in the execution of some complex tasks. So in other words, if you're proficient, you can knock out all the bread and butter type questions, maybe even some of the slightly more difficult questions, but maybe you struggle just a little bit on the very most complex tasks in a given topic. Developing factual information about a topic is demonstrated fully. Appropriate methodology is used to solve basic problems, although there might be like a minor flaw in the execution. On more complex problems, an ability to connect the concept or standard with previous topics or to use many steps to solve a problem hasn't been demonstrated, right? So on the developing, you can do the simpler problems, but you're struggling more on the more complicated ones. At the novice level, there's a basic understanding of the objective that's being demonstrated, but the evidence is typically limited to recalling factual information on some but not all aspects of the topic. There's either no ability to demonstrate, demonstrator to apply the concept appropriately, or there is some fundamental flaw. So you're showing that you know something about the topic, but you really haven't made too much progress in the types of problems you're being asked about. And then finally, not yet. That's basically you've left it blank, or maybe what you have put doesn't really, doesn't really address the question itself. So you get one of those 5 levels of mastery for each topic, for standard 1, for standard 2, and so on. So the way that assessments are going to work, or the way you could call them tests, the way that those are going to work, and let's just be real specific here with this first example, is after you finish standards 1 through 5, you'll hit this module that says standards 1 through 5 assessment. So what's going to happen is you are going to take an actual test. This test is going to have a number of questions, and they are going to be labeled based upon what standard they address. So for example, standard 1 is all about solving equations. So there's probably going to be multiple questions that address standard 1. Now, rather than going through and giving you a score on every single question that I ask about standard 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at standard 1 as a whole, and I'm going to decide based on that rubric, are you an expert? Are you proficient? Are you developing? Are you novice? Or do you have a not yet? And so that's what you're going to see. Now, of course, I'm going to show you where you made mistakes and things and all the different problems. But in terms of a score, you just get a score for all of them. And then the same thing for standard 2 and standard 3, 4, and 5. So what's going to happen is when I grade your first assessment, instead of having a score at the top that says like 82%, instead, you're just going to have 5 different levels of mastery. 1 for standard 1, 1 for standard 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's what you're going to receive back from me. All right. So to help get you ready for assessments, first of all, how are they going to look? So this is assessments are the one time that you have to come in and actually take a test in person. So you have a couple of different options. So here under important assessment information, click on that. You are going to either go to the Yakima Campus Proctored Testing Center or the Grandview Campus Proctored Testing Center. And here are their hours. I know it says fall, but they just haven't updated that yet. So I'll change it once they do to winter quarter, but these should be the hours. And so on the day that the standards 1 through 5 assessment is taking place, then if you're in the Yakima area, you go here between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. If you're in the Grandview area, you go here between the hours of 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. And again, they got the room numbers down here that you go to. Of course, all the assessments are about an hour long. So make sure that, you don't arrive later than 8 p.m., for example, because you need an hour to take it, obviously, and they are going to close at 9. If you are completely out of the area, then what we can do is usually arrange for some approved proctored center in the area that you are living. So if anybody's not within, Yakima County, then please reach out to me right away and I'll get you the information for how to go about finding an approved proctored testing center to do your assessments. So you'll do your assessment here. They will send me your assessments. They'll scan them to me. And so I usually get them by the next morning. And then I go through and I grade them. And then once I've graded them, then I use the inbox to send them back to you, all graded and everything. In the grade book, all right, let me click on the grade book. The first thing that you'll see, and you can change what you arrange by. I would suggest changing what you arrange by to assignment group, because the first assignment group is the levels you have on each standard based on taking an assessment. So you can see here with my fake student account, it says 4 out of 4, 3 out of 4, 2 out of 4. Now, again, remember, these numbers are just there as a placeholder for 4 is expert, 3 is proficient, 2 is developing, and so on. All right. So you can see the scores that you have here. And for my fake student, I've put scores in everything. But of course, at first after that first assessment, you would just have these 5 filled in. And while I'm in here, if you just keep scrolling, then that's where you can see your scores on like Newton assignments and written assignments and things like that. All right. Now, one of the things that I talked about is the fact that I believe in a growth mindset, right? And that there would be opportunities to improve scores if you don't like where you're at first. So what's going to happen is, and I'm going to click on the calendar to kind of talk us through this. So the standards 1 through 5 assessment, that's going to take place on January 17th. Then a little while later, on February 1st, is the standard 6 through 11 assessment. So you'll have scores for standards 1 through 5 and then standards 6 through 11. Then the following week, on February 8th, it says standards 1 through 11 reassessment. So on that day, you can, and it's your option, but you can go back to the proctored testing center and they'll give you a packet of materials of standards 1 through 11. And so there'll be questions for all 11 of those standards. What you can then do is go through and reassess on the standards that you want to improve on. So you don't have to reassess on everything, right? Just the ones that you want to make improvement on. And then I go ahead and I grade that. And it doesn't matter, even if you got a 0, a not yet on the first assessment for, say, let's say standard number 3, you got a 0 on it. You didn't have any idea what to do. Even if you get an expert on February 8th, it's going to completely replace that old grade. So it doesn't matter that you got a 0 before. Your grade is going to be at an expert level after getting expert on it, or a 4 on it, on February 8th. So your old scores are completely replaced. Okay, and so that's what I mean by, I used the analogy in the last video of, okay, you failed your driver's test, you went back, you studied, you took it again, you have the same license as everybody else. Same thing here. Okay, I don't really care that you were struggling with it before. The fact is you're an expert now based on what you showed me on the reassessment. Okay, so that's kind of the pattern of things. And you can see here on February 15th is standards 12 through 17 assessment. And a little later on the 28th is standards 18 through 23 assessment. And then finally, in March, on March 6th, you have the ability to reassess on standards 12 through 23. Okay. So the way to think of it is, generally, you'll always have one opportunity to reassess on standards. There is an exception to that. On the 11th, I do give you the chance to pick up to 5 standards from throughout the quarter that you want to take one more shot at. So if there's still some you're disappointed in after the reassessment, for a limited number of them, you can take one more crack at it. Well, obviously, as we get closer to the end of the quarter, that's when I'll talk about that in a little more detail. But that's generally the pattern, right? So I want you to, even if you have an assessment where things don't go as well as you'd like, that just shows you, okay, I have a little more work to do. I have a little more studying to do. So you still have the opportunity to bring that up and get the grade that you're going for in the class. You can see there is a final exam. It's on the 14th. The final exam, the way that works is some of the standards, but not all of the standards will appear on the final exam. And I think the best way for me to kind of talk us through this is to kind of give some examples here. So here's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to kind of make some stuff up here, but just to give us something concrete to look at. So suppose on standard number 1, before the final, going into it, maybe this is after a reassessment, before the final, you have a 3 or proficient. Okay. Let's say I don't ask about it on the final. Okay. So it's just doesn't even show up on the final. Then your overall score is a proficient. Okay. Or a 3. Let's say on standard 2, let's say that you are at an expert level. So you're at a 4. And I do ask about standard 2 on the final, and you get a 2 instead. This is going to be the one time during the quarter where I will average out those 2. So you had an expert going in, you got a 2 on the final or developing, so those average out to a 3 for proficient. Now, on the other hand, if it goes the other way, let's say you had a 2 going in, and then you got an expert on the final, well, good for you. You're now at an expert. Okay, so even if you struggle with a standard all quarter, but then on the final, you're able to finally, okay, now I got it. Okay, great. Now you bring that score up, and it's like the 2 never even happened. There is kind of one strange type of a scenario to show you, though. Let's say you had a 3 on standard 4 before, and then on the final you get a 2. Averaging those out averages to 2.5, right? So what does that mean? Well, what it means is that when I calculate your grade, you get half of a proficient and half of a developing. Okay, so what does that mean exactly? Well, the issue here is that the way that I'm going to calculate your grade, the way that I turn it into a letter grade, because I have to do that, is if I look at the syllabus, is with this table here. Now, it's kind of an overwhelming table, so I'm not going to try to go through it in a lot of detail, but here's what I would basically say. Your letter grade is based upon me just counting up how many experts did you get? How many proficients did you get? Developing, novice, not yet. How many of each did you get? And then based on that, I can see what your letter grade should be. All right. So as I'm tallying up how many of each you got, that's what I mean by you get half a proficient, right? So I take all the proficients you got, and then I add a half of a proficient, half of a developing. All right, so that's how your grade ultimately gets turned into a letter grade. Now, I'll fully admit this is not the most friendly thing, and also the other almost worst thing about it is that it's really impossible to use until the end of the quarter, right? So one of the things that I have done to help students out in kind of knowing where they stand in their grade is I've created a grade projector. So you'll find this under important links. So the grade projector is just a Google spreadsheet, and where you can type in, and again, it's, when you see a 4, it means expert, a 3, it means proficient, where you can type in the numerical stand-in for those, and it'll spit out a grade to you. So just for example, we were just looking at my fake student account, and what I did was I typed in my fake student account. I typed in their scores here, and what it says is that turns out to be a B. And that's exactly what the table in the syllabus would say. But this is a little easier way to look at it. Now, here's the thing though. How do you know where you stand at a specific point in the quarter? Well, what you can do is after each assessment, the first one is standards 1 through 5, right? So after the standards 1 through 5 assessment, you can type in your scores. And what it'll do is it will say, okay, if these are your scores on the first 5, if you continue at this pace, this is the grade you're headed for. So if I type in the first 5 scores for my fake student, okay, notice it's projecting a B minus for me. Now, the reason it's projecting a different grade than the grade that actually happened for my fake student is because all it's doing is it's saying, okay, if you got 2 experts, then if you continue at this pace, we anticipate you getting 11 experts, right? If you get 2 proficients, we anticipate 11 proficients at the end of the quarter. And if you got 1 developing, we anticipate 5 developing at the end of the quarter. Who knows if that might be the only developing you ever get, right? You may get all 4s or all experts from here on out. So you have to really take this with a grain of salt, but it is a way for you to kind of keep tabs on, where your score is sitting at any given time. I would just say that as you use this grade projector, please do make sure that if you are concerned about something you see, you talk to me first, because it may be that, no, your grade's not in as bad of a place as you think. For example, notice that to get a C or higher, you're not allowed to have any zeros, any not yets. So you could have, right? You could have all 4s, but if you have a 0, it's just going to tell you F. Okay, but if that's what happened after the first 5, after the first 5 standards are assessed on, well, of course, you're going to study standard 5 really hard. And when you reassess on it, you're not going to keep it at a 0, right? You're going to get it up, even if you got it up to a 2, right? Then all of a sudden you're at a B. So especially when you use this early on, it can be very volatile. Little changes can make big differences in the projected grade. So just make sure you talk to me if you're ever seeing something concerning in this grade projector. All right. Now, in the syllabus, this is important. Here are all the dates of your assessments and reassessments. So this is important so that you can make sure you plan accordingly, right? So, if you have job schedules to think about and things like that, these are the days where all of these are going to occur. So just keep that in mind, please. Put these on your calendar so that they're coming for sure. Now, of course, to get ready for assessments, you want to do everything you can to do the best you can at the beginning, because here's the thing: even though you get to reassess later, the more things that you are going to have to reassess on, that's more that you're having to juggle in terms of studying while you're still trying to learn new material. So you always want to do as best you possibly can the first time. So to help you get ready for assessments, there are these standard assessment preparation assignments. So I'm going to explain that a little bit. So these assignments break into 4 parts. The first one is just like a typical review assignment where here's some questions to do. That's part one. Part two then is for you to go through and grade yourself on the 5 standards, right? Based on the fact that these are labeled, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to grade yourself, say, okay, what did I get on standard 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? And that'll do a couple things. One, it'll kind of get you used to this grading system and looking at the rubrics. And here's I put the rubrics here for you to use. But then I also give you the solutions that you're going to grade yourself based off of. So you're going to grade yourself. That's part 2. And then finally, part 3. This isn't necessarily something for you to write down, but it's just saying, okay, anything that I'm less than an expert on, what's my plan for getting myself to an expert level, right? So it just gives you a bunch of options like, hey, here's some things that you can do to bring up your level of understanding on whichever standards you didn't do as well on in this assignment. And then number 4, anything you're below an expert on, if you can explain your mistakes or the misconceptions you had, then if you can get to that point, then that's really the kind of the test for whether you're ready, right? Or whether you're going to be able to perform at an expert level, is if you can identify mistakes and then actually explain what it is that you did incorrectly. So that's part 4. So this is an assignment you'll turn in. It's just like the written assignments I described in the previous video. And so you just attach that in the same way you attach images of your work in the same way you attach images of your work for written assignments. But I think you'll find these really helpful in preparing for your assessments. All right, so that's in a nutshell the way the grading works. Like I said, I know it's different. You might have questions, so please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions you have. If you'd rather talk in person about it, then that's a great opportunity to just jump into student hours and ask me your questions there as well. So anyway, it's going to be a great quarter, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thanks.